welcome back to episode 5 of Lismo Reads the Divine Comedy. I'm your host, Liam, and today we're going to be reading Cantos 11 through 13 of the Divine Comedy, the Inferno cantos. So last episode we switched from the Oxford University translation to the Longfellow translation, and I found that one to be a little bit overly literal and a little bit complicated to digest and immediately understand. So I did some research and decided on switching to the translation by a man named James Sebald. And this is a little bit later of a translation. I think this was further along the 1800s than the Longfellow one. I was debating potentially switching to the Carey translation, but I read through that a little bit and it seemed, a little bit equally complicated, whereas I dipped my toes in the water with the Sebald translation and I found it to be a little bit more easily understandable, which I think will serve better for the format of these videos. For now, we're going to try this one out. If this one doesn't pan out well, we'll find another one, but I think what's important is that it's in the public domain and that it's mostly understandable. The rest we'll have to conquer ourselves. Okay, so on the last episode 4, we read through Cantos 8 through 10, and I would say a lot happened in those cantos. I'm going to quickly go over here what we were able to comprehend from those. So in Canto 8, it was a little interesting because my understanding of this canto was completely different when I first read it, and then it was upon editing the video that I realized I got some major points wrong. Dante and Virgil are ferried over this moat. They're actually ferried over the river Styx to a tower that has a flame on it, and they're ferried over the river Styx by a man named Phlegyas. In the midst of being ferried over the river Styx, a spirit comes out of the water, grabs on the boat, and starts spewing sort of wretched stuff at Dante and Virgil. The whole time while reading this canto, I understood that I thought that was Phlegyas, actually. For some reason, I thought Phlegyas was this sort of antagonistic creature following them, and then he came out of the water while they were halfway through. It was somehow I missed the part where he's the one actually ferrying them, so I got that part wrong. So that's something to keep in mind. Phlegyas ferries Dante and Virgil over the river Styx so that they can get to the tower. And upon getting to the tower, they are greeted by a big crowd of people, with a couple of people who do not want them to be able to step through the gates into the next layer. Virgil speaks with them independently, and he is told that he's going to have to complete this trial in order for them to open the gate and allow passage for Dante and Virgil. Virgil is a little bit upset and frustrated. This is probably the most angry we see him so far in the poem, but he has resolve. He's prepared to win this. He says he has done it before, so he tells Dante to trust in him. Canto IX begins with them kind of discussing the trial a little bit, saying a little bit of the same stuff, like, don't worry about it, we'll get through this. And then suddenly these these snake ladies appear in the sky or on the tower above Dante and Virgil, and they threaten to kill Dante. They threaten to turn him into stone, because I guess he's still living. Technically, he can still be killed even down here. And so Virgil kind of turns him away, makes sure he does not get turned to stone by these Gorgon creatures. And in the midst of that, there's a big swell behind them coming from the marsh. And it turns out that this divine heavenly figure appears, and it walks over the river Styx. It walks right on the water, and he arrives and opens the gate for Dante and Virgil, meaning that they don't have to do this trial anymore. They can just walk up and go through the gate. Canto X, they follow this heavenly figure through the tombs that the gate entered them into. In the tombs, they come upon the tomb of Farinata and the soul / corpse of Farinata, who is, I believe, a religious figure that Dante referred to earlier in the poem. Dante and Farinata's political and sort of religious views definitely oppose each other from what I read, but they are able to have this sort of civil discourse or civil discussion between them while Dante speaks to the spirit of him. And while he's speaking to Farinata, we see a second soul appear from the tomb, who is Cavalcanti. Dante is friends in real life, Dante was friends in real life with Cavalcanti's son, Guido. Cavalcanti asks Dante if Guido is still alive. Dante doesn't immediately give an answer, but he later tells Farinata to tell Cavalcanti that he is still alive. That was interesting, and that stumped me a lot on the first read. It wasn't until later where I kind of realized, reading through and reading other people's accounts, that this was a second person in the tomb with Farinata. I thought the whole time it was Farinata talking, but I was wrong about that. Farinata finishes his discussion with Dante, and then Virgil calls Dante over. He says, remember these things that you've spoken about. They might come in handy later when you meet Beatrice. They ultimately end up continuing on, and they enter a valley which has an awful stench to it. And that is where we left off at the end of Canto X. Okay, so with the summary done, we're going to continue right on into the next readings, which are Canto XI, XII, and XIII of Inferno. We're going to try out, see how this new translation works out. If this one doesn't sit right, then I'm going to probably pick out a new one. Maybe we'll try the Carey one, but I like the look of this one at first glance, so I'm hoping it ends up being a little bit more readable and understandable than the previous one. So we'll give it a shot. Anyways, get comfortable, get your cup of coffee, sit down, put your phone away, and here we go. Let's start with Inferno, Canto XI of the Divine Comedy. We, at the margin of a lofty steep, made of great shattered stones and circle bent, arrived where worser torments crowd the deep. So horrible a stench and violent was upward wafted from the vast abyss. Behind the cover we for shelter went. Of a great tomb where I saw written this, Hope Anastasius is within me thrust, whom the straight way Photinus made to miss. Now on our course a while we linger must, the master said. Be but our sense resigned a little to it, and the filthy gust. We shall not heed, then I. Do thou but find some compensation lest our time should run wasted? And he, behold, 'twas in my mind. Girt by the rocks before us, O my son, lie 3 small circles, he began to tell, braided like those with which thou now hast done, all of them filled with spirits miserable. That sight of them may thee henceforth suffice. Hear how and wherefore in these groups they dwell. Whatever in heavens abhorred as wickedness has injury for its end, and others bane by fraud resulting or in violent wise. Since fraud to a man alone doth appertain, God hates it most, and hence the fraudulent band that lowest down endure the fiercer pain. Of the violent is the circle next at hand to us, and since 3 ways is violence shown, 'tis in 3 several circuits built and planned. To God, ourselves, or neighbors may be done violence, or on the things by them possessed. As reasoning clear shall unto thee make known, our neighbor may by violence be distressed, with grievous wounds, or slain. His goods and lands by havoc, fire, and plunder be oppressed. Hence those who wound and slay with violent hands, robbers and spoilers in the nearest round are all tormented in their various bands. Violent against himself may man be found, and against his goods, therefore without avail they in the next are in repentance drowned. Who on themselves loss of your world entail, who gamble and their substance madly spend, and who when called to joy lament and wail, and even to God may violence extend, by heart denial and by blasphemy, scorning what nature doth in bounty lend. Sodom and Cahors hence are doomed to lie, within the narrowest circlet surely sealed, and such as God within their hearts defy. Fraud, against whose bite no conscience findeth shield, a man may use with one who in him lays trust, or with those who no such credence yield. Beneath this latter kind of it decays, the bond of love which out of nature grew. Hence in the second circle heard the race, the fiending, given flattery who pursue magic, false coining, theft, and simony, imps, beraters, and such like residue. The other form of fraud makes nullity of natural bonds, and what is more than those, special trust whence men on men rely. Hence in the place whereon all things repose, the narrowest circle and the seat of dis, each traitor's gulfed in everlasting woes. Thy explanation, master, as to this, is clear, I said, and thou hast plainly told, who are the people stowed in the abyss? These first few stanzas are a little bit just going into detail. We're finally getting a little bit of information, I think just straight up information here. From what I understand, We must be around the sixth circle of hell. I think Virgil is telling Dante here that there are three yet to go here. He gives explanations for the first two. I think he might have given an explanation for the third, or we haven't gotten there yet, but he basically says the third layer of hell, the one we are closest to right now, this circle of hell is for people who use violence for their own gain. So people who rob their neighbor or pillage lands, or anybody who uses violence in the name of gaining riches or for selfish reasons. Then on to the second layer, so the layer after the violence layer, is people who manipulate for riches, or how he puts it is feigning given and flattery, who pursue magic, false coining, theft, and simony. So people who pursue money and riches through manipulative means, such as counterfeiting, pimps, barators, and such like residue. And he also says fraud. So yeah, like fraudulence. So people doing, I guess, in a modern sense, people doing like credit card theft or telephone scammers. People like that would be going to the second layer of hell. I just realized that these are all supposed to rhyme, so we're gonna try doing that from moving forward. Line 70. But tell why those the muddy marshes hold, the tempest driven, those beaten by the rain, and such as meeting virulently scold, are not within the crimson city ta'en, for punishment and hateful unto God, and if not hateful, wherefore doomed to pain. And he to me, why wander thus abroad, more than is wont thy wits, or how engrossed is now thy mind, and on what things bestowed. This rhyming scheme is a little tough. It's gonna take some getting used to, so bear with me here. Hast thou memory of the passage lost, in which thy ethics for their subject treat, of the three moods by heaven abhorred the most? Malice and bestiality complete, and how compared with these incontinence offends God less and lesser blame doth meet. You know, I do like the rhyming. The rhyming is fun. It gives it a little bit more flow. I can almost know what to expect when I'm reading the next part. If of this doctrine thou extract the sense, and call to memory what people are, above outside in endless penitence, why from these guilty they are sundered far, thou shalt discern and why on them alight the strokes of justice in less angry war. O sun that clearest every troubled sight, so charmed am I by thy resolving speech, thou yields me joy no less than knowing right. Therefore I pray a little backwards reach, I ask to where thou stayest usury. Sins against God's bounty and this mystery teach, he said who gives his ear to philosophy, is taught by her nor in one place alone, but nature in her course is governed by, even mind divine and art which thence hath grown, and if thy physics thou wilt search within, thou'lt find ere many leaves are open thrown, this art by yours far as your art can win, is followed close the teacher by the taught, as grandchildren then to God your art is kin. And from these two do thou recall to thought, how Genesis begins, should come supplies, of food for man and other wealth besought, and since another plan the usurer applies. Nature and nature's child to have disdain, because on another ground his hope relies. But come for to advance I now am fain, the fishes over the horizon line. Quiver over Charis now stands all the wane, and further yonder does the cliff decline. Okay, so I'm getting maybe a little bit hang of this rhyme scheme. I had to look up a crash course on terza rima, which is what the rhyming scheme is of the Divine Comedy. And I discovered that Dante Alighieri is who created this rhyme scheme. So this is pretty cool. We're kind of learning as we go along here that he's credited as being the creator of terza rima, this rhyming scheme that is used within the Divine Comedy as we read it here. But yeah, anyways, that closes out Canto XI. Thank God this translation has some footnotes that'll be very useful. I can actually get most of the details right here. Anything I read incorrectly, I'll be able to correct here. So it seems like these last few layers of hell, the first through the third, are sort of for malicious people, and it's made clear here and also through the footnotes that the seed of dis refers to the first layer of hell, the lowest layer. It's also it's apparent that as Virgil is explaining these layers of hell, they're actually moving through them. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, As we learn of each one here, they're actually moving through each one, and they're not just talking about them before they enter them, they're actually talking about them and moving through them simultaneously. Dante is critical of Aristotle here in the sense that he views his philosophies to be, displacing people's faith in God, saying, I guess, we should be thinking about all of these crazy ethics and physics, that, this is something for God to decide, I suppose. So it looks like, Canto XI here is Virgil and Dante getting really into the thick of it. Either they're still before the seventh howl, and they're just discussing what lies ahead, or they just got through it. So I think we'll probably be able to figure that out coming up here in Canto XII, whether or not they made it through 7 and 8 already, and now they're in 9 or 1. I don't know what you would call that. Anyways, let's continue on to Canto XII. The place of our descent before us lay, precipitous, and there was something more, from the sight of which all eyes had turned away, as the ruin which upon the shore of adage fell upon the side of Trent, though earthquake or by slip of what before upheld it from the summit whence it went, far as the plain the shattered rocks supply, some sort of foothold to who makes descent. Such was the passage down the precipice high, and on the riven gully's very brow lay spread at large the Cretan infamy, which was conceived in the pretended cow, as when he saw he bit himself for rage, like one whose anger gnaws him through and through. Perhaps thou deemest, call to him the sage, this is the Duke of Athens drawing nigh, who war to the death with thee on earth did wage. Begone thou brute, for this one passing by, untutored by thy sister has thee found, and only comes thy sufferings to spy, and as the bull which snaps what held it bound, on being smitten by the fatal blow, halts in its course and reels upon the ground. The Minotaur I saw reel to and fro, and he, the alert, cried to the passage haste, while yet he chafes 'twere well thou down shouldst go. So we descended by the slippery waste of shivered stones which many a time gave away, neath the new weight my feet upon them placed. I musing went, and he began to say, perchance this ruined slope thou thinkest on. Watched by the brute rage I did now allay, but I would have thee known when I came down the former time into this lower hell, the cliff had not this ruin undergone. It was not long, if I distinguish well, ere he appeared who wrenched grey prate from the utmost circle trembling fell, through all its part the nauseous abyss. With such violence the world, I thought, was stirred by love, as they say by this, she back to chaos has been often brought. And then it was this ancient rampart strong, was shattered here and at another spot, but toward the valley look we came ere long, down to the river of blood where boiling lie all who by violence work others wrong. Okay, so Dante and Virgil are descending down into the 7th layer of hell, I believe. As they do so, they pass the Minotaur. So yeah, this is the Minotaur from the Labyrinth, and he is also the gatekeeper of the 7th gate of hell. As they pass him, Virgil sort of seems to dismantle him with facts and logic, and then they just keep on going through, where they get to a river of boiling blood, and that's where we leave off. O insane rage, O blind cupidity, by which in our brief life we are so spurred, ere downward plunge an evil case for eye, an ample ditch I now beheld engird, and sweep in circle all around the plain, as from my escort I had lately heard. Between this and the rock in single train, centaurs were running who were armed with bows. As if they hunted on the earth again, observing us descend they all stood close, save 3 of them who parted from the band, with bow and arrows they in coming chose. What torment from afar one made demand, come ye to share who now descend the hill. I shoot unless ye answer whence ye stand, my master said we wield no answer till. We came to Chiron standing at thy side, but thy quick temper always served thee ill. Then touching me, 'tis Nessus, he who died, with love for beauteous Dejanire possessed, and who himself his own vendetta plied. He in the middle, staring on his breast, is mighty Chiron who Achilles bred. And next the wrathful Pholus they invest, the foss in their thousands round it tread, shooting whoever from the blood shall lift, more than his crime allows his guilty head. As we moved nearer to those creatures swift, Chiron drew forth a shaft and dressed his beard, back on his jaws using the arrow's cleft, and when his ample mouth of air was cleared, he said to his companions, "Have ye seen the things the second touches straight are stirred, as they by feet of shades could never have been, and my good guide who to his breast had gone, the part where join the natures well I ween, he lives made answer, and if thus alone, he seeks the valley dim neath my control. Necessity, not pleasure, leads him on. Our came from where the alleluias roll, who charged me with this office strange and new. No robber he, nor mine a felon soul, but by that power which makes me to pursue the rugged journey whereupon I fare, accord us one of thine to keep in view, that he may show where lies the ford and bear this other on his back to yonder strand. No spirit he that he should cleave the air, wheeled to the right, then Chiron gave command to Nessus, turn and lead them and take tent, they be not touched by any other band. We with our trusty escort forward went, threading the margin of the boiling blood, where they whose seeds were raising loud lament, people I saw up to the chin imbrued. These all are tyrants, the great centaur said, who blood and plunder for their trade pursued. Here for their pitiless deeds and tears now are shed, by Alexander and Dionysius fell, through whom in Sicily dolorous years were led. The forehead with black hair so terrible is Ezelino, that one blonde of hue, Obizo d'Este, whom as rumors tell, his stepson murdered, and reports speak true. I to the poet turned who gave command, regard thou chiefly him, I follow you. Ere long the centaur halted on the strand, close to a people who far as the throat, forth of that bullock came, seemed to stand. Thence a lone shade to us he pointed out, saying in God's house ran he weapon through. The heart which still on Thames winds cult devout, when I saw people, some with heads in view, and some their chest above the river bore, and many of them I beholding knew. And thus the blood went dwindling more and more, until at last it covered but the feet. Here took we passage to the other shore, as on this hand thou seest still abate. In depth the volume of the boiling stream, the centaur said, so grows its depth more great. Believe me towards the opposite extreme, until again its circling course attains, the place where tyrants must lament supreme. Just upon that side involves in pains, with Attila, once of the world the pest, Pyrrhus and Sextus, and forever drains tears out of the Rainier of Corneto pressed, and Rainier Pazzo in that boiling mass, whose brigandage did so the roads infest, then turned he back alone the ford to pass. It seems like what happens in this canto is they enter the seventh gate by passing the Minotaur, but then they come upon a group of centaurs who the footnotes describe as brutal beasts, and I think most people probably know them as being half man, half horse. Virgil asks to speak with Chiron, who is also described by the footnotes as being the most just centaur. And Chiron acts as a guide for them through the seventh layer of hell. In the seventh layer of hell, they need to cross the river of blood, which is the fourth and maybe the final river that they're going to have to cross in the course of this journey. A few more people are described here as being residents of this layer, including an Alexander, who people are not sure if it's Alexander the Great or a different Alexander who was known for being a little bit of a tyrant, petty Thessalian tyrant. Anyways, they come across and see some historical figures who I think most of which opposed Rome in some way, and that was partially their sin in Dante's eyes. And one of the other main characters they meet here is Nessus, who was killed by Hercules, but then plotted revenge by gave to Dejanira a bloodstained shirt with venom on it, and then Dejanira was Hercules' lover, and he ended up wearing a shirt that had this venom on it, and then he died, and therefore Nessus got his revenge on Hercules. I guess because of that, he's in this hell. Nessus helps Dante cross the river by putting him on his back, Virgil drops behind, supposedly to let the centaur kind of lead the way here instead of Virgil. And so they're following Chiron, Dante being held on Nessus's back, and they are crossing the River of Blood. And I think that is all of the main events being accounted for here. So with that, we'll continue on to Canto number 13. Ere Nessus landed on the other shore, we for our part within a forest drew, which of no pathway any traces bore, not green the foliage, but of dusky hue. Not smooth the boughs, but gnarled and twisted round, for apples poisonous thorns upon them grew. No rougher brakes or matted worse are found, where savage beast betwixt cornetto roam. And Sicina, abhorring cultured ground, the loathsome harpies nestle here at home, who from the Stropades the Trojans chased, with dire predictions of woe to come. Great winged are they, but human-necked and faced, with feathered belly and with claw for toe. They shriek upon the bushes wild and waste. Ere passing further, I would have thee known. The worthy master thus began to say, Thou art in second round, nor hence shalt go, till by the horrid sand thy footsteps stay. Give then good heed, and things thou'lt recognize, that of my words will prove the verity. Wailings on every side I heard arise. Of who might raise them I distinguish not, whereon I halted smitten with surprise. I think he thought that haply 'twas my thought, the voices came from people among the trees, who to escape us hiding places sought, wherefore the master said from one of these, Snap thou twig and thou shalt understand, how little with thy thought of the fact agrees. Thereon a little I stretched forth my hand, and plucked a tiny branch from a great thorn. Why dost thou tear me? Made the trunk demand, when dark with blood it had begun to turn. It cried a second time, while wound me thus, doth not a spark of pity in thee burn? Though trees we be, once men were all of us, yet had our souls the souls of serpents been, thy hand might have well have proved more piteous, as when the fire hath seized a fagot green. At one extremity the other sighs, and wind escaping hisses, so was seen. At where the branch was broken, blood to rise, and words were mixed with it, I dropped the spray, and stood like one whom terror doth surprise. The sage replied, soul vexed with injury, had he been only able to give trust to what had been narrated in my lay, his hand toward thee would never have been thrust. 'Tis hard for faith and I to make it plain. Urge him to trial, mourn it though I must, but tell him who thou wast, so shall remain. This for amends to thee, thy fame shall blow afresh on earth, where he returns again. So Dante and Virgil enter the 8th layer here, which is a forest surrounded by the River of Blood. In this forest, there are some harpies who I think a lot of people might be familiar with. They're like the feathered ladies who fly around and have like talons and screeching. The harpies are meant to represent shameful waste and disgust with life, according to the author here, or the translator, which I suppose makes sense because there's some sort of real life references Dante is making here to Trojans who were planning on having some great feast in an archipelago of Italy. It's also worth noting, I was a little bit off, I think, before in how I understood the 8th layer. The 8th layer is devoted to people who commit suicide. Yeah, I don't think that fits with the description I said earlier. And prodigals. So people, I think this is people who are reckless. Gamblers would definitely fit. People who do not take care of themselves. And I guess in this instance, in Dante's belief, people who commit suicide end up on this layer of hell. I think this generally falls in line with Christian belief, but obviously in this text we're seeing a lot of Greek mythology mixed in. So I don't know what of it is from, the more pagan religions and what of it comes from Christianity. Okay, line 55. And then the trunk, thy sweet words charm me so, I cannot dumb remain nor count it hard, if I some pains upon my speech bestow, for I am he who held both keys in ward of Frederick's heart, and turned them how I would, and softly oped it, and as softly barred, till scarce another in his counsel stood. To my high office I such loyalty bore, it cost me sleep and haleness of my blood, the harlot who removeth nevermore. From Caesar's house eyes ignorant of shame, a common curse of courts the special sore, set against me the minds of all aflame, and these in turn Augustus set on fire, till my glad honor's bitter woes became my soul filled with full a disdainful ire, thinking by means of death disdain to flee, gainst my just self unjustly did conspire. I swear even by the new roots of this tree, my fealty to my lord I never broke, for worthy of all honor sure was he, if one of you return among living folk. Let him restore my memory overthrown, and suffering yet because of envy's stroke. Still for a while the poet listened on, then said, now he is dumb, lose not the hour, but make request if more thou'dst have made known. And I replied, do thou inquire once more. Of what thou thinkest I would gladly know, I cannot ask, ruth wrings me to the core. On this he spake even as the man shall do, and liberally what thou of him hast prayed. Imprisoned spirit do thou further show, how with these knots of the spirits have been made. Incorporate, and if thou canst declare, if from such members ever is loosed a shade. Then from the trunk came vehement puffs of air, next to these words converted was the wind. My answer to you shall be short and clear, when the fierce soul no longer is confined, in flesh torn thence by action of its own, to the seventh depth of Minos 'tis consigned. No choice is made of where it shall be thrown, within the wood, but where by chance 'tis flung. It germinates like seed of spelt that's sown, a forest tree it grows from sapling young. Eating its leaves the harpies cause it pain, and open loopholes whence its sighs are wrung. We for our vestments shall return again, like others, but in them shall never be clad. Men justly lose what from themselves they have attained, dragged hither by us all throughout the sad forest. Our bodies shall be hung on high, each on the thorn of its destructive shade, while to the trunk we listen linger nigh, thinking he might proceed to tell us more. A sudden uproar we were startled by, like him who, that the huntsman and the boar, to where he stands are sweeping in the chase, knows by the crashing trees and brutish roar. Upon our left we saw a couple race, naked and scratched, and they so quickly fled, the forest barriers burst before their face. Speed to my rescue, death, the foremost pled, the next as wishing he could use more haste. Not thus, O Lano, thee thy legs bested, when one at Tapo's tournament thou wast, then haply wanting breath aside he stepped, merged with a bush on which himself he cast, behind them through the forest onward swept. A pack of dogs, black, ravenous, and fleet, like greyhounds from their leashes newly slipped. In him who crouched they made their tenth to meet, and having piecemeal all his members rent, haled him away, and during anguish great, grasping my hand, my escort forward went, and led me to the bush which, all in vain, through its ensanguined openings made lament. James of St. Andrews, it we heard complain, what profit hadst thou making me thy shield? For thy bad life doth blame to me pertain. Then halting there, this speech my master held. Who wast thou that through many wounds dost sigh, mingled with blood, words big with sorrow swelled? O souls that hither come, was his reply, to witness shameful outrage by me borne. Whence all my leaves torn off around me lie, gather them to the root of this drear thorn. My city for the Baptist changed of yore, her former patron were a foreign return. He with his art will make her eye deplore, and were it not some image doth remain, of him where Arnos crossed from shore to shore, those citizens who founded her again, on ashes left by Attila had spent, their labor of surety all in vain. In my own house I up a gibbet went. And that concludes Canto number 13. So before we get into the summary of the last canto we just read, 13, I would like to just go through what we read before that and summarize all of it together. So in Canto XI, we get a little bit of a precursor to what is yet to come. Virgil explaining to Dante what the seventh circle of hell consists of. And my reading of it was a little bit incorrect before, because I thought he was sort of elaborating on the seventh, eighth, and ninth. And they do make references to the ninth circle of hell, being that sinners who are guilty of fraud actually go to the lowest level of hell, which is the ninth circle. But I was incorrect in saying that the eighth circle of hell is for those who are guilty of suicide and gambling. I got those mixed up when I read it the first time. Those sinners are still in the seventh circle of hell, which we actually read a little bit of in this last Canto 13. In Canto 11, Virgil explains that they are close to entering the seventh circle of hell, which consists of those who are violent towards their neighbors, those who commit suicide, and those who gamble, or as they refer to in this text, prodigals. Now, the 12th canto begins with them kind of going down these steps and arriving at the seventh gate, which is guarded by the Minotaur, which is Greek mythology, the same Minotaur that is of the labyrinths. Virgil exchanges words with the Minotaur, basically shunning him, telling him to allow them to pass, and either the Minotaur opens the gate for them or they just go by. It almost seems like Virgil uses some sort of power over the Minotaur, because at some point they say the Minotaur is reeling from whether it's an attack or just harsh words that Virgil says to him. In the seventh circle of hell, we see the sinners who were guilty of violence towards their neighbors, and these sinners are not guarded so much so as looked after by a group of centaurs, which are half man, half horse, also from Greek mythology. One centaur of the group, named Chiron, is noted as being the most just of the group, and Virgil is looking for him, I think because he expects that Chiron will be able to help them make passage through here. Throughout this seventh circle, they see more historical figures that were guilty of violence toward their neighbor. Some leader, like Attila the Hun was one of them. There was an Alexander named, which they're not sure if it's Alexander the Great or this other kind of barbaric Alexander who was like a tyrant. And then there's another character named Nessus who got tied up with, I believe, Hercules and his lover Deianira. Nessus is on this level of hell because he's guilty of actually poisoning Hercules to get revenge on Hercules, who I believe slayed Nessus. So it's like this dual revenge situation. Nessus carries Dante across the river of blood on his back, the river of blood named Phlegethon. Virgil is said to have dropped back a little bit, I guess to allow Chiron to lead them instead of Virgil. And it's toward the end of that canto closes out and we begin Canto XIII, which when I was reading it, I thought they had entered the eighth circle of hell, but they're still in the seventh circle. It's just the second part of the seventh circle. And it's in this second part of the seventh circle where they enter into a forest that is home to harpies and then another group of sinners that are on the seventh circle of hell. And this group of sinners contains people who've committed suicide and then those who gambled or were sort of recklessly spending. And the author or the translator notes that these sinners are different from the ones on the fourth circle who were just lavish spenders. I guess there's a point Dante's trying to make between those who spend lavishly to indulge themselves in a hedonistic sense versus those who gamble away their money recklessly with no accounting for their own well-being. And I guess you can kind of see how people who commit suicide and people who gamble would end up in a similar layer of hell, according to Dante. Canto XIII was a little bit confusing because most of the canto he's actually speaking with a tree, but based on the footnotes, it looks like the tree is actually supposed to represent a real-life figure, Pierre Delvigne, who, and I'm reading the footnotes directly here, went from being a begging student of Bologna, rose to be the chancellor of the Emperor Frederick II. It looks like he allegedly committed suicide, and that's why he's here. Later on, we see mention of James of St. Andrews, who was a notable arson, it would seem. He inherited an enormous wealth of money and then would just literally burn the money and his property just to see it burn. We then see a couple running naked through the forest being chased by a bunch of dogs. And it says here in the footnotes they were naked to represent prodigals being stripped bare of, I guess, self-respect or decency. And so the nakedness of this couple are meant to kind of explain how they've reduced themselves to nothing. So yeah, that's a pretty intense depiction there. Some harsh symbolism is used by Dante in this canto. And the very last line in this translation is, "In my own house I up a gibbet went." Whoever the narrator is apparently committing suicide by hanging themselves. Looking at the footnotes, it apparently is unclear who actually committed suicide here by hanging themselves, but there's a couple of suggestions, one being one of the Agli, some say one of the Matzi. It's not so much important as to who committed suicide, but just the fact that the suicide ended them up here in the seventh layer of hell. Once again, I would like to distance myself from the actual beliefs of Dante here. To each one their own beliefs, that's fine, but just a little bit maybe aggressive to fit into my own set of beliefs. But with all of that said, that would conclude the summary of what we read today. I'm gonna hopefully dig a little bit more into this for the beginning of the next episode to see if there's anything I missed that I can catch. Bear with me here as I try out this new camera. I like the look of it, but I can already see in the recordings so far it's a little choppy, so I'm gonna have to play around with some settings. But stick around, leave a comment down below on something you thought was interesting from today's reading. Make sure to tune in next time for Cantos 14, 15, and 16. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye. Went from being a begging student of Bologna, who went from being who